On one side of the path is managed very differently to the other side of the path. So on my right hand side, this is Plantation and Ancient Woodland site. This was planted mainly with Corsican pine, and to restore, the site was cleared, and we've got a huge amount of regeneration of mainly birch, but oak and some sweet chestnut in here and other species as well. Dense area of regeneration, very different to the kind of open habitat on our left, which is more what you'd expect to find in this environment. This structural diversity is really positive. It's not a negative. The only challenge we have on the right is that there are a lot of veteran ancient trees dotted throughout this area, and unfortunately a lot of them were lost in that process because they were exposed too quickly because of the clear fell. No precautionary work was done in advance to ensure that the trees could withstand that change of environment. We do have the odd ones that have persisted, but they're not in great health. And this one has recently been haloed around, potentially a bit too quickly, but it's still, surviving, which is positive. But unfortunately, there are a lot of losses in this area, which could have potentially been prevented if different steps were taken in advance of clearing the site, such as a kind of precautionary halo thin in advance to allow those trees to put on a bit more of a lower crown that would enable them to cope with that exposure. One of the kind of steps that could have been taken to help care for this tree would have been a kind of precautionary halo thin before this area as a whole was cleared. So perhaps kind of 5, maybe even 10 years in advance of the clear fell, just to ensure that the tree had a kind of crown that was more capable of withstanding an open environment. Whereas instead what's happened is this site was cleared, this tree did kind of go into a kind of period of decline in association with the kind of open exposure and then quick kind of regeneration of birch around it, and it's recently been haloed, but perhaps which will be having a kind of benefit, paying a benefit to this tree, but not ideal to be doing an intervention at this late stage where perhaps earlier intervention could have had greater benefit. So it's just that kind of planning in advance of a fell that is necessary, but making sure that your kind of veteran trees are robust in advance of that intervention. One of the important elements of taking a kind of preemptive intervention in advance of a kind of wider management intervention is monitoring the response of your remnant feature. So here, obviously, veteran trees. If that tree does or doesn't respond well to that halo, that should then also inform what future management you do. So that adaptive management in response is really important, because otherwise it's not really worth doing if you're not monitoring the response the tree has to that intervention. So if it's not, for example, putting out epicormic growth and forming a lower crown, understanding why that's not happening. And it might just be that the tree isn't particularly adept at putting on that growth, but you could also be causing issues and you want to not make them any worse with future interventions.